Lesson 6, Within the Mind of the One. In our last lesson we gave you the inner teachings of the yogi philosophy, relating to the real nature of the universe, and all that is therein contained. We trust that you have pondered well and carefully the statements contained in that lesson, for in them is to be found the essence of the highest yogi teachings. While we have endeavored to present these high truths to you in the simplest possible form, yet unless your minds have been trained to grasp the thought, you may have trouble in fully assimilating the essence of the teachings. But, be not discouraged, for your mind will gradually unfold like the flower, and the sun of truth will reach into its inmost recesses. Do not be troubled if your comprehension seems dull, or your progress slow, for all things will come to you in time. You cannot escape the truth, nor can the truth escape you. And it will not come to you one moment sooner than you are ready to receive it, nor will it be delayed one moment in its coming, when you are ready for it. Such is the law, and none can escape it, nor alter it, nor modify it. All is well, and all is under the law. Nothing ever happens. To many, the thought that the universe and all that is therein contained, are simply thought forms in the infinite mind. Mental creations of the Absolute, may seem startling, and a sense of unreality may pervade one. This is inevitable, but the reaction will come. To some who have grasped this mighty truth there has come a feeling that all is nothing, which idea is embodied in their teachings and writings. But this is merely the negative phase of the truth. There is a positive phase which comes as one advances. The negative phase shows us that all that we have considered as real and permanent, the foundations of the universe itself, is but a mental image in the mind of the Absolute, and therefore lacks the fundamental reality that we had previously associated with it. And realizing this, we are at first apt to feel that, indeed, all is nothing, and to fall into a state of apathy, and lack of desire to play our part. 1. The world. But, then, happily the reaction sets in, sooner or later, and we begin to see the positive phase of the truth. This positive phase shows us that while all the forms, shapes, and phenomena of the universe are but parts of a great show world, still the essence of all must be reality itself, else there would not be even the appearance of a universe. Before a thing can be a mental image, there must be a mind to hold that mental image, and a being to possess that mind. And, the very essence of that being must pervade and be immanent in every image in that mind. Just as you are really in your mental images, as well as they in you, so must the Absolute be in its mental images, or creations, or thought forms, as truly as they are in the mind of the Absolute. Do you see this plainly? Think well over it, ponder it well, for in it lies the truth. And so, this positive phase of the truth, is far from depressing. It is the most stimulating conception one can hold, if he but grasps it in its entirety and fullness. Even if it be true that all these shapes, and forms, and appearances, and phenomena, and personalities, be but illusion as compared to the inner reality, what of it? Are you not then assured that the spirit within yourself is the spirit of the Absolute, that the reality within you is the reality of the Absolute that you are, because the Absolute is, and cannot be otherwise? Does not the peace, and calm, and security, and bliss that comes to you with this realization, far more than counterbalance the petty nothings that you have discarded? We think that there can be but one answer to this. When you have fully realized the truth, what gives you the greatest satisfaction and content in life? Let us see. Well, there is the satisfaction of immortality. The human mind instinctively craves this. Well, what that even the highest finite conceptions of future life have given you, can compare with the assurance of actual being, in and of the Absolute. What are your petty conceptions of heavens, paradises, happy hunting grounds, divine regions of the blessed, and the other ideas of the various religious sects, when compared with the conceptions of your infinite and eternal existence and spirit, your relation with the one, that conception of infinite wisdom, being, and bliss? When you grasp this truth, you will see that you are in eternity right now, and are immortal even this moment, as you have always been. Now, what we have said above is not intended to deny the heaven worlds, or planes. On the contrary, you will find much in the teachings regarding these, which the yogis enter into with much detail. But, we mean that back of all the heavens and celestial planes, there is a still higher state of being, the Absolute Being. Even the heavens, and heaven worlds, and regions of the devas, or archangels, are but relative states. There is a state higher than even these exalted relative states, and that is the state of the conscious unity and identity with the One. When one enters into that state, he becomes more than man, more than gods. He is then in the bosom of the Father. And now, before proceeding to a consideration of the phenomenal manifestation of the Absolute, the evolving of the universe in the infinite mind, we will again call your attention to the fact that underlies all the universe of forms, shapes and appearances, and that is, as we stated in our last lesson, all manifestations and emanations of the Absolute are mental creations of the Absolute thought forms held in the infinite mind, the infinite spirit in them, and they in the infinite spirit. And, the only real thing about man is the spirit involved in the thought form. The rest is mere personality, which changes and ceases to be. The spirit in the soul of man, is the soul of the soul, which is never born, never changeth, never dieth. This is the real self of man, in which, indeed, he is one with the Father. And, now let us consider the yogi teachings regarding the creation of the universe, and the evolution of the living forms thereon. We shall endeavor to give you the story as plainly as may be, holding fast to the main thought, and avoiding the side paths of details, etc., so far as is possible. In the first place, we must imagine ourselves back to the beginning of a day of Brahm, the first dawn of that day, which is breaking from the darkness of a night of Brahm. Before we proceed further, we must tell you something about these days and nights of Brahm, of which you have seen much mention in the Oriental writings. The yogi teachings contain much regarding the days and nights of Brahm, the inbreathing and outbreathing of the creative principle, the periods of Manvantara, and the periods of Pralaya. This thought runs through all the Oriental thought, although in different forms, and with various interpretations. The thought refers to the occult truth that there is in cosmic nature alternate periods of activity and inactivity, days and nights, inbreathings and outbreathings, wakefulness and sleep. This fundamental law manifests in all nature, from universes to atoms. Let us see it now in its application to universes. At this point we would call the attention of the student that in many of the presentations of the Hindu teachings the writers speak as if the Absolute, itself, were subject to this law of rhythm, and had its periods of rest and work, like its manifestations. This is incorrect. The highest teachings did not so hold, although at first glance it would so appear. The teaching really is that while the creative principle manifests this rhythm, still even this principle, great though it be, is a manifestation of the Absolute, and not the Absolute itself. The highest Hindu teachings are firm and unmistakable about this point. And, another point, in which there is much mistaken teaching. In the periods of creative inactivity in a universe it must not be supposed that there is no activity anywhere. On the contrary, there is never a cessation of activity on the part of the Absolute. While it is creative night in one universe, or system of universes, there is intense activity of midday in others. When we say the universe we mean the universe of solar systems, millions of such systems that compose the particular universe of which we have any knowledge. The highest teachings tell us that this universe is but one of a system of universes, millions in number, and that this system is but one, in a higher system, and so on, to infinity. As one Hindu sage hath said, well do we know that the Absolute is constantly creating universes in its infinite mind and constantly destroying them, and, though millions upon millions of 8-broken barons intervene between creation and destruction, yet doth it seem less than the twinkle of an eye to the Absolute One. And so the day and night of Brahm means only the statement of the alternating periods of activity and inactivity in some one particular universe, amidst the infinite universality. You will find a mention of these periods of activity and inactivity in the Bhagavad Gita, the great Hindu epic. The following quotations relate to the edition published by the Yogi Publication Society, which was compiled and adapted by the writer of these lessons. In that edition of the Bhagavad Gita you will find these words attributed to Krishna, the Absolute One in human incarnation: the worlds and universes, yea, even the world of Brahm, a single day of which is like unto 1,000 yugas, 4 billion years of the earth, and his night as much. These worlds must come and go. A broken bar. The days of Brahm are succeeded by the nights of Brahm. In these Brahmic days all things emerge from invisibility, and become visible. And, on the coming of the Brahmic night, all visible things again melt into invisibility. The universe having once existed, melteth away and lo! Is again recreated. And, in the same edition, we find these words, attributed to the same speaker, At the end of a kalpa day of Brahma period of creative activity I withdraw into my nature, all things and beings. And, at the beginning of another kalpa, I emanate all things and beings, and re-perform my creative act. We may say here, in passing, that modern science now holds to the theory of periods of rhythmic change of rise and fall of evolution and dissolution. It holds that, beginning at some time in the past broken bar-ons of time, there was the beginning of an upward or evolutionary movement, which is now underway, and that, according to the law of nature, there must come a time when the highest point will be reached, and then will come the beginning of the downward path, which in time must come to an end, being succeeded by a long period of inactivity, which will then be followed by the beginning of a new period of creative activity and evolution, a day of Brahm. This thought of this law of rhythm, in its universal form, has been entertained by the thinkers of all times and races. Herbert Spencer expressly held to it in his first principles, expressing it in many ways akin to this: evolution must come to a close and complete equilibrium or rest, and again, it is not inferable from the general progress towards equilibrium, that a state of universal quiescence or death will be reached, but that if a process of reasoning ends in that conclusion, a further process of reasoning points to renewals of activity and life, and again, rhythm in the totality of changes, alternate eras of evolution and dissolution. The ancient Western philosophers also indulged in this idea. Heraclitus taught that the universe manifested itself in cycles, and the Stoics taught that the world moves in an endless cycle, through the same stages. The followers of Pythagoras went even further, and claimed that the succeeding worlds resemble each other, down to the minutest detail. This latter idea, however, the idea of the eternal recurrence, while held by a number of thinkers, is not held by the yogi teachers, who teach infinite progression and evolution of evolution, as it were. The yogi teachings, in this last mentioned particular, are resembled more by the line of Lotus's thinking, as expressed in this sentence from his Microcosmos: the series of cosmic periods, a broken bar, each link of which is bound together with every other a broken bar. The successive order of these sections shall compose the unity of an onward advancing melody. And, so through the pages of Heraclitus, the Stoics, the Pythagoreans, Empedocles, Virgil, down to the present time, in Nietzsche, and his followers, we find this thought of universal rhythm, that fundamental conception of the ancient yogi philosophy. And, now, returning to the main path of our thought, let us stand here at the beginning of the dawn of a day of Brahm. It is verily a beginning, for there is nothing to be seen, there is nothing but space, no trace of matter, force or mind, as we know these terms. In that portion of infinite space that is, of course, in that portion of the infinite mind of the Absolute One, for even space is a conception of that mind, there is nothing. This is the darkest moment, just before the dawn. Then comes the breaking of the dawn of the Brahmic day. The Absolute begins the creation of a universe. And, how does it create? There can be no creation of something out of nothing, and except the Absolute itself there is but nothing. Therefore the Absolute must create the universe out of its own substance, if we can use the word substance in this connection. Substance means, literally, that which stands under, being derived from the two Latin words, sub, meaning under, and stare, meaning to stand. The English word understand means, literally, to stand under, the two words really meaning the same. This is more than a coincidence. So the Absolute must create the universe from its own substance, we have seen. Well, what is the substance of the Absolute? Is it matter? No. For matter we know to be, in itself, merely a manifestation of force, or energy. Then, is it force or energy? No. Because force and energy, in itself, cannot possess mind, and we must think of the Absolute as possessing mind, for it manifests mind, and what is manifested must be in the manifester, or manifesting agent. Then the substance must be mind? Well, yes, in a way, and yet not mind as we know it, finite and imperfect, but something like mind, only infinite in degree and nature, something sufficiently greater than mind as we know it, to admit of it being the cause of mind. But, we are compelled to think of it as infinite mind, for our finite minds can hold no higher conception. So we are content to say that this substance from which the Absolute must create the universe is a something that we will call infinite mind. Fix this in your mind, please, as the first step in our conception. But, How can the infinite mind be used to create finite minds, shapes, forms, and things, without it being lessened in quantity? How can you take something from something, and still have the original something left? An impossibility. And, we cannot think of the Absolute as dividing itself up into two or more portions, for if such were the case, there would be two or more absolutes, or else none. There cannot be two absolutes, for if the Absolute were to divide itself so, there would be no absolute, but only two relatives, two finites instead of one infinite. Do you see the absurdity? Then how can this work of creation be accomplished, in view of these difficulties which are apparent even to our finite minds? You may thresh this question over and over again in your minds. Men have done so in all times, and you will not find the answer except in the fundamental idea of the yogi teachings. And this fundamental idea is that the creation is purely a mental creation, and the universe is the mental image, or thought form, in the mind of the Absolute and the infinite mind, itself. No other creation is possible. And so this, say the yogi masters, this is the secret of universal creation. The universe is of, and in, the infinite mind, and this is the only way it could be so. So, fix in your mind this second step in our conception. But then, you ask us, from whence comes force, matter, and finite mind? Well asked, good student, your answer shall be forthcoming. Here it is. Finite mind, force or energy, and matter in themselves have no existence. They are merely mental images, or thought forms in the infinite mind of the Absolute. Their whole existence and appearance depends upon their mental conception and retention in the infinite mind. In it they have their birth, rise, growth, decline and death. Then what is real about me? You may ask. Surely I have a vivid consciousness of reality. Is this merely an illusion, or shadow? No, not so. That sense of reality which you possess, and which every creature or thing possesses, that sense of I am, is the perception by the mental image of the reality of its essence, and that essence is the spirit, and that spirit is the substance of the Absolute embodied in its conception, the mental image. It is the perception by the finite, of its infinite essence, or, the perception by the relative of its absolute essence, or, the perception by you, or I, or any other man or woman, of the real self, which underlies all the sham self or personality. It is the reflection of the sun, in the dewdrop, and thousands of dewdrops, seemingly thousands of suns, and yet but one. And yet, that reflection of the sun in the dewdrop is more than a reflection, for it is the substance of the sun itself, and yet the sun shines on high, one and undivided, yet manifesting in millions of dewdrops. It is only by figures of speech that we can speak of the unspeakable reality. To make it perhaps plainer to some of you, let us remind you that even in your finite mental images there is evident many forms of life. You may think of a moving army of thousands of men, and yet the only I in these men is your own I. These characters in your mind move and live and have their being, and yet there is nothing in them except you. The characters of Shakespeare, Dickens, Thackeray, Balzac, and the rest, were such strong mental images that not only their creators were carried away by their power, and apparent ability, but even you who read of them, many years after, perhaps, feel the apparent reality, and weep, or smile, or grow angry over their actions. And, yet there was no Hamlet, outside of Shakespeare's mind, no Micawber outside of Dickens, no Purgriat outside of Balzac. These illustrations are but finite examples of the infinite, but still they will give you an idea of the truth that we are trying to unfold in your mind. But you must not imagine that you and I, and all others, and things, are but mere imaginations, like our created characters. That would be a most unhappy belief. The mental creations held by you and I, and other finite minds, are but finite creations of finite minds, while we, ourselves, are the finite creations of an infinite mind. While our, and Dickens, and Balzac's, and Shakespeare's creations live and move and have their being, they have no other I than our finite minds, while we, the characters in the divine drama, story, or epic, have for our I, our real self, the absolute reality. They have merely a background of our finite personalities, and minds, before which they may disport themselves, until, alas, the very background fades away to dust, and both background and shadows disappear. But, we have behind our personalities the eternal background of reality, which changeth not, neither doth it disappear. Shadows on a screen though our personalities may be, Yet the screen is real and eternal. Take away the finite screen and the shadows disappear, but our screen remains forever. We are mental images in the infinite mind. The infinite mind holds us safe. We cannot be lost. We cannot be hurt. We can never disappear, unless we be absorbed in the infinite mind itself. And then we still are. The infinite mind never forgets. It never can overlook us. It is aware of our presence and being. Always, we are safe, we are secure, we are. Just as we could not be created from nothing, so we cannot be converted into nothing. We are in the all and there is no outside. At the dawn of the Brahmic day, the Absolute begins the creation of a new universe, or the recreation of one, just as you may care to state it. The highest yogi teachings inform us that the information relating to this event, which is, of course, beyond the personal knowledge of man as we know him, has been passed down to the race from teachers, who have received it from still higher teachers, and so on, and on, higher and higher, until it is believed to have originated with some of those wonderfully developed souls which have visited the earth from higher planes of being, of which there are many. In these lessons we are making no claims of this sort, but pass on the teachings to you, believing that their truth will appeal to those who are ready for them, without any attempt to attribute to them an authority such as just mentioned. Our reference to this high source of the teachings was made because of its general acceptance in the Eastern countries, and by occultists generally. The yogi teachings inform us that, in the beginning, the Absolute formed a mental image, or thought form, of an universal mind, that is, of an universal principle of mind. And here the distinction is made between this universal mind principle, or universal mind stuff, as some have called it, and the infinite mind itself. The infinite mind is something infinitely above this creation of the universal mind principle, the latter being as much an emanation as is matter. Let there be no mistake about this. The infinite mind is spirit. The universal mind principle is mind stuff, of which all finite mind is a part. This universal mind principle was the first conception of the Absolute, in the process of the creation of the universe. It was the stuff from which all finite mind forms, and is formed. It is the universal mental energy. Know it as such, but do not confound it with spirit, which we have called infinite mind, because we had no other term. There is a subtle difference here, which is most important to a careful understanding of the subject. The yogi teachings inform us that from this mental principle there was developed the universal principle of force or energy, and that from this universal force principle there developed the universal principle of matter. The Sanskrit terms for these three principles are as follows: Chitta, or the universal mind substance, or principle prana, or the universal energy principle, and Akasa, or the universal principle of matter. We have spoken of these three principles, or three great manifestations, in our advanced course of lessons, which followed our 14 lessons, several of years ago, but it becomes necessary for us to refer to them again at this place in connection with the present presentation of the subject. As was stated in the lessons just mentioned, these three manifestations, or principles, are really one, and shade into each other. This matter has been fully touched upon in the concluding lessons of the aforesaid advanced course, to which we must refer you for further details, in order to avoid repetition here. You will find a wonderful correspondence between these centuries-old yogi teachings, and the latest conceptions of modern science. Well, to return to the main path once more, the teachings inform us that the Absolute thought into being, that is, held the mental image, or thought form, of Chitta, or universal mind principle. This Chitta was finite, of course, and was bound and governed by the laws of finite mind, imposed upon it by the will of the Absolute. Everything that is finite is governed by laws imposed by the great law which we call the Absolute. Then began the great involution which was necessary before evolution was possible. The word involve, you know, means to wrap up, to cover, to hide, etc. And the word evolve means to unwrap, to unfold, to unroll, etc. Before a thing can be evolved, or unfolded, it must first have been involved or folded in, or wrapped up, etc. Everything must be involved before it can be evolved. Remember this, please. It is true on all planes, mental, physical, and spiritual. A thing must be put in before it may be taken out. This truth, if remembered and applied to metaphysical problems, will throw the clearest light upon the darkest problems. Make it your own. Therefore, before the process of evolution from the gross forms of matter up to the higher, and then on to the middle, from higher to higher, and then on the spiritual plane that evolution which we see being performed before our sight today. Before that evolution became possible, there was a necessary involution, or wrapping up. The spirit of the Absolute first involved itself in its mental image thought form, or creation, of the mind principle, just as you may involve yourself in an earnest thought in deep meditation. Did you never lose yourself in thought, or forget yourself in an idea? Have you not spoken of yourself as having been wrapped in thought? Well, then you can see something of what is here meant, at least so far as the process of involution is concerned. You involve yourself in your meditations. The Absolute involves itself in its mental creations, but, remember, the one is finite, and the other infinite, and the results are correspondingly weak or strong. Obeying the laws imposed upon it, the mental principle then involved itself in the energy principle, or prana, and the universal energy sprang into existence. Then, in obedience to the same laws, the prana involved itself in the akasa, or universal matter principle. Of course, each involving practically created the wrapper, sheath of the lower principle. Did you see this? Each, therefore, depends upon the principle higher than itself, which becomes its parent principle, as the yogis express it. And in this process of involution the extreme form of matter was reached before the process of evolution became possible. The extreme form of gross matter is not known to us today, on this planet, for we have passed beyond it. But the teachings inform us that such forms were as much grosser than the grossest matter that we know today, as the latter is gross in comparison with the most ethereal vapors known to modern science. The human mind cannot grasp this extreme of the scale, any more than it can the extreme high degree of manifestation. At this point we must call your attention to certain occult teachings, widely disseminated, which the highest yogi teachers discountenance, and contradict. We allude to the teaching that in the process of involution there was a degeneration or devolution from higher to lower forms of life, until the gross state of matter was reached. Such a teaching is horrible, when considered in detail. It would mean that the Absolute deliberately created high forms of life, archangels, and higher than these gods in fact, and then caused them to devolve until the lowest state was reached. This would mean the exact opposite of evolution, and would mean a going down in accordance with the divine will, just as evolution is a going up in accordance with the divine will. This is contrary to man's best instincts, and the advanced yogi teachings inform us that it is but an illusion or error that men have created by endeavoring to solve spiritual mysteries by purely intellectual processes. The true teaching is that the process of involution was accomplished by a principle involving itself in the lower principle created within itself, and so on until the lowest plane was reached. Note the difference. Principles as principles did this, and not as individual forms of life or being. There was no more a devolution in this process than there was in the Absolute involving itself in the mental image of the mind principle. There was no devolution or going down, only an involution or wrapping up, of principle, within principle, the individual life not having as yet appeared, and not being possible of appearance until the evolutionary process began. We trust that we have made this point clear to you, for it is an important matter. If the Absolute first made higher beings, and then caused them to devolute into lower and lower forms, then the whole process would be a cruel, purposeless thing, worthy only of some of the base conceptions of deity conceived of by men in their ignorance. No. The whole effort of the divine will seems to be in the direction of raising up individual egos to higher and still higher forms. And in order to produce such egos the process of involution of principles seems to have been caused, and the subsequent wonderful evolutionary process instituted. What that reason is unknowable. As we have said over and over again, we cannot pry into the infinite mind of the Absolute, but we may form certain conclusions by observing and studying the laws of the universe, which seem to be moving in certain directions. From the manifested will of the Divine One, we may at least hazard an idea as to its purposes. And these purposes seem to be always in an upward lifting and evolution. Even the coming of the night of Brahm is no exception to this statement, as we shall see in future lessons. From the starting of the process of involution from the mental principle, down to the extreme downward point of the grossest manifestation of matter, there were many stages. From the highest degree of the finite mind, down to lower and still lower degrees, then on to the plane of force and energy, from higher to lower degrees of principle within principle, then on to the plane of matter, the involutionary urge proceeded to work. When the plane of matter was reached, it, of course, showed its highest degree of manifested matter, the most subtle form of ether, or kasa. Then down, 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 went the degrees of matter, until the grossest possible form was reached, and then there was a moment's pause, before the evolutionary process, or upward movement, began. The impulse of the original will, or thought, had exhausted its downward urge, and now began the upward urge or tendency. But here was manifested a new feature. This new feature was the tendency toward individualization. During the downward trend the movement was in mass, that is, by principle as principle, without any splitting up into portions, or centers. But with the first upward movement there was evidenced a tendency toward creating centers of energy, or units of activity, which then manifested itself, as the evolutionary movement continued, from electrons to atoms, from atoms to man. The gross matter was used as material for the formation of finer and more complex forms, and these in turn combined, and formed higher, and so on, and the forms of energy operated in the same way, and the manifestations of centers of mind or consciousness in the same way, but all in connection. Matter, energy and mind formed a trinity of principles, and worked in connection, and the work was always in the direction of causing higher and higher forms to arise, higher and higher units, higher and higher centers. But in every form, center or unit, there was manifested the three principles: mind, energy, and matter. And within each was the ever-present spirit. For spirit must be in all just as all must be in spirit. And, so this evolutionary process has continued ever since, and must continue for a tilde broken bar ons yet. The Absolute is raising itself up into itself higher and higher egos, and is providing them with higher and higher sheaths in which to manifest. And, as we shall see in these lessons, as we progress, this evolution is not only along the physical lines, but also along the mental. And it concerns itself not only with bodies, but with souls, which also evolve, from time to time, and bodies are given these souls in order that they may work at their evolution. And the whole and aim of it all seems to be that egos may reach the stage where they are conscious of the real self of the spirit within them, and its relation to the spirit of the Absolute, and then go on and on and on, to planes of life and being, and activities of which even the most advanced of the race may only dream. As some of the ancient yogi teachers have said, men are evolving into supermen, and supermen into gods, and gods into supergods, and supergods into something still higher, until from the lowest bit of matter enclosing life, unto the highest being, yea, even unto the Absolute there is an infinite ladder of being, and yet the one Spirit pervades all, is in all, as the all is in it. The creative will, of which we have spoken in these lessons, is in full operation all through life. The natural laws are laws of life imposed by the Absolute in his mental image. They are the natural laws of this universe, just as other universes have other laws. But the Absolute itself has no laws affecting it, in itself is law. And these laws of life, and nature, along its varying planes, material, of energy and mental, are also, in the Divine Mind, else they would not be at all, even in appearance. And when they are transcended, or apparently defied by some man of advanced development, it is only because such a man is able to rise above the plane upon which such laws are operative. But even this transcending is, in itself, in accordance with some higher law. And so, we see that all, high and low, good and bad, simple or complex, all are contained within the mind of the One. Gods, angels, adepts, sages, heavens, planes, all, everything is within the universe, and the universe is within the mind of the One, and all is proceeding in accordance with law, and all is moving upward and onward, along the lines of evolution. All is well. We are held firmly in the mind of the One. And, just as the tendency was from the general principle toward the particular individual soul, so is there a reconciliation later on, for the individual soul, as it develops and unfolds, loses its sense of separateness, and begins to feel its identity with the One Spirit, and moves along the lines of unfoldment, until it becomes in conscious union with God. Spiritual evolution does not mean the growth of the spirit, for the spirit cannot grow, it is already perfect. The term means the unfoldment of the individual mind, until it can recognize the spirit within. Let us close this lesson with the central thought. There is but one. That one is spirit. In the infinite mind of that one spirit there arose the mental image or thought form of this universe, beginning with the thought of the principle in mind and passing on to the principle of energy and then on to the principle of matter proceeded the involutionary process of creation. Then, upward began the evolutionary process, and individual centers or units were formed. And the tendency and evolutionary urge is ever in the direction of unfolding within the ego of the realization of the indwelling spirit. As we throw off sheath after sheath, we approach nearer and nearer to the spirit within us, which is the one spirit pervading all things. This is the meaning of life, the secret of evolution. All the universe is contained within the mind of the one. There is nothing outside of that infinite mind. There is no outside, for the one is all in all space, time, and laws, being but mental images in that mind, as are likewise all shapes and forms, and phenomena. And as the ego unfolds into a realization of itself, its real self, so does its wisdom and power expand. It thus enters into a greater and greater degree of its inheritance. Within the mind of the one, is all there is. And I, and thou, and all things are here within that infinite mind. We are always held in mind by the Absolute, are always safe here. There is nothing to harm us, in reality. For our real self is the real self of the infinite mind. All is within the mind of the one. Even the tiniest atom is under the law, and protected by the law. And the law is all there is. And in that law we may rest content and unafraid. May this realization be yours. Peace be with you all.